The morning sunlight crept slowly across the cracked walkway leading to the Reyes farmhouse, painting the peeling white boards in streaks of gold. Birds sang in the oak trees, and the air smelled faintly of rain-soaked soil, the scent of a place that had weathered generations. Daniel Reyes stepped out of his dusty pickup truck, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, expecting the same quiet routine he'd known since he moved back to care for the property after his father passed. But as his eyes lifted toward the porch, his body froze mid-step. Something bright orange fluttered in the wind, taped across the front door, the kind of official, aggressive paper no homeowner ever wants to see. The words, "Demolition Notice, Immediate Action Required," screamed back at him in bold black print. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, unable to breathe. He walked closer, each step crunching against the gravel path that his father had once meticulously raked smooth. The closer he got, the more the reality hit him. The city seal, the HOA's letterhead, the heavy language about unsafe structures and non-compliance with community standards. His fingers trembled as he pulled the notice off the door. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if soaked with years of struggle. His parents had built this place from the ground up, 2 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a barn his mother had painted red every summer until her hands gave out. Every board told a story. Every nail held a memory. And now, someone behind a desk was calling it unfit for existence. Daniel pushed open the front door, its hinges letting out a familiar creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight slicing through the curtains. The old family photographs on the wall watched him silently, his father with grease-stained hands holding a young Daniel by the shoulders, his mother smiling from her garden, her straw hat tipped to one side. The farmhouse wasn't falling apart. Not really. Sure, it was old, weathered by decades of storms and time, but it stood solid. He could still hear his father's voice echoing in his mind. Asterisk, this land doesn't owe anyone anything, son. You take care of it, it takes care of you. Asterisk. He ran his thumb over the edge of the demolition notice. The date was circled in red, 3 weeks. Just 21 days before they'd bring bulldozers to level the home that had outlasted half the neighborhood. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who was behind this. Marjorie Kent, the HOA President, had been circling this property for months, always showing up with her clipboard and fake smile, suggesting community redevelopment projects that somehow always ended with Daniel's land being reallocated. She wanted it gone. She'd called the farmhouse an eyesore during one of the board meetings, claiming it didn't fit the modern aesthetic of the community. But Daniel wasn't part of her glossy new development. His house was older than the HOA itself, standing proud before they'd paved their first road. He tossed the notice onto the kitchen table and sat down hard on a creaky wooden chair. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, the scent his mother used whenever guests came over. He could still picture her hands moving over the tablecloth, smoothing wrinkles no one else noticed. The thought burned behind his eyes. Unsafe structure, he muttered bitterly, staring at the faded linoleum beneath his boots. The refrigerator hummed quietly, a metronome marking his anger. He looked out the window at the old oak tree in the yard, the one his father had planted the day Daniel was born. Its roots had run deep, surviving droughts, storms, and now, apparently, bureaucratic greed. He took a long sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding him. They thought he'd just roll over, that he'd sell out and let them flatten his home to make room for another tennis court or community recreation zone. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As the hours slipped by, Daniel pulled out a box from a hall closet, a dusty, time-worn container filled with papers, deeds, and yellowing letters. He spread them across the kitchen table, sorting through the history of his family's land. There it was, the original deed from 1962, signed by his grandfather, proof that the land had been theirs long before the HOA ever formed. He ran his fingers over the ink, faded but still strong. The farmhouse might not look like much to the people running the HOA, but it was home. It was legacy. And if they thought they could erase 60 years of sweat and sacrifice with a single notice, they were in for a fight. The evening light dimmed, turning the fields outside to a copper glow. Daniel stepped back onto the porch, the orange notice now folded neatly in his hand. The hum of distant traffic was faint, the world felt still. He looked at the old house, its windows reflecting the dying light like watchful eyes. "They think they can scare me," he whispered, his voice low but steady. He tucked the notice into his jacket pocket and stared down the gravel driveway where Marjorie's car had parked so many times before, clipboard gleaming in the sun. "Over my dead body," he said. The camera would linger there, catching his silhouette framed against the twilight, the farmhouse rising behind him, a quiet fortress of memory, defiance, and unspoken promise. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm rolling in from the horizon. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree as if whispering approval. Daniel turned, walked inside, and locked the door. The camera slowly panned across the porch, settling once more on the crumpled edge of the orange notice sticking from his pocket, a symbol of war declared. The fight for the Reyes home had just begun. The HOA meeting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the polished conference table like the stage lights of an interrogation room. Daniel sat at the far end, clutching a folder stuffed with photographs, reports, and the original land deed. His jaw was set tight, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Around him, the other homeowners murmured in low tones, a mix of curiosity and unease. Most had heard rumors that the old Reyes farmhouse was unsafe, that the HOA was taking necessary action. But no one had seen proof. That would change tonight. At the front of the room stood Marjorie Kent, the HOA President, her posture straight as a ruler. Her tailored navy blazer gleamed under the lights, and her manicured fingers tapped the edge of her clipboard in rhythm with her speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began smoothly, her voice carrying a rehearsed confidence, "as you know, our community prides itself on safety, progress, and maintaining the beauty of our neighborhood. Unfortunately, the Reyes property has become a serious concern." She clicked a remote, and the projector flickered to life, showing a slideshow of grainy close-up photos, cracks in paint, sagging gutters, a broken window pane. To the untrained eye, it looked damning. To Daniel, it was insultingly staged. Marjorie turned toward him with a thin smile. "Mr. Reyes, we've conducted an inspection." An inspection you never notified me about, Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp but steady. Her smile didn't falter. "The HOA is within its right to assess community hazards, Mr. Reyes. As you'll see, the home poses structural risks and is a blight on property values." She gestured to a photo of his porch, where a shadow made it look like the boards were buckling. The audience shifted in their seats. A few people glanced his way, uncertain. Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the tile, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. "This is nonsense," he said, lifting the engineering report from his folder. 2 months ago, I paid for a private inspection by a licensed structural engineer. The foundations sound. The framework's intact. Your photos are misleading." He laid the report on the table in front of her. "You're lying to everyone here." Marjorie didn't look down. She gave a small, dismissive laugh that carried just enough condescension to ignite the tension further. "With all due respect, Daniel, I'm sure you believe that. But our responsibility is to the entire community, not just one homeowner's nostalgia." Her words hit like a slap. The word nostalgia, as if 60 years of family history were nothing more than sentimental clutter. Daniel leaned forward. "This isn't about safety, Marjorie. It's about land. You've been pushing this redevelopment plan for months. The HOA wants my property because it's the only open lot large enough for that luxury park project your developer friend's been sniffing around." Gasps rippled through the room. Marjorie's eyes flickered, just for a second, before she regained her composure. "That's an outrageous accusation," she said crisply. "And frankly, this kind of hostility only proves how difficult it's been to work with you." She looked around the table at the other board members, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "We're simply trying to protect the integrity of our neighborhood." One of the residents, a gray-haired man named Harold, raised his hand. "Marjorie," he said hesitantly, "I've lived here 20 years. That old house isn't hurting anyone. It's part of the town's history. Can't we look at alternatives before we—" Marjorie cut him off, her voice suddenly harder. "Harold, we've discussed this. The longer we allow neglect to spread, the more everyone's property value suffers. We have to make tough choices for the greater good." Daniel's patience finally snapped. "You mean for your good," he said, his voice rising. He stepped closer to the projector, yanking out one of the photos from the slideshow stack. "This picture. You took it from behind my fence, without permission. That's trespassing. And that crack on the wall? It's a paint seam from the last restoration, not structural damage. You want to talk about tough choices? How about the choice you made to forge inspection records just to justify tearing my house down?" A sharp murmur filled the air. Someone whispered, "Forge records." Marjorie's mask of calm wavered. Her nostrils flared slightly, but her voice stayed even. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to file a formal complaint." Daniel laughed, a short, bitter sound that carried across the silent room. "Oh, don't worry. I already have. With the city." He lifted a folded document from his folder, a copy of the municipal building registry that showed no demolition request had ever been filed legally. "You tried to skip the process. You tried to push it through behind closed doors, hoping no one would notice. But now they know." Marjorie's lips parted, but no words came. The quiet that followed was electric, thick, suffocating, and heavy with realization. A few homeowners exchanged wide-eyed looks. Others shifted uncomfortably under the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Finally, she regained enough composure to say, "This meeting is adjourned." Her voice trembled slightly for the first time that evening. She gathered her papers quickly, avoiding Daniel's gaze, but the damage was done. Daniel didn't move. He watched her walk out, her heels clicking down the hallway like gunshots. The projector light flickered behind him, casting his shadow across the room, tall, unwavering. The other residents began to murmur again, louder now, voices rising with a mix of doubt and anger. The truth was leaking through the cracks. He gathered his documents and walked toward the exit, passing Harold, who gave him a subtle nod of support. "You did the right thing, son," Harold whispered. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for Marjorie's silver Lexus idling under a streetlight. Daniel paused by his truck and watched as she sat inside, speaking urgently on her phone, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard. She glanced up, locking eyes with him through the windshield for 1/10 second before driving off. The camera would linger on Daniel's reflection in his truck window, weary but resolute. The war had moved out of the shadows and into the open. As he started the engine, the echo of Marjorie's words replayed in his mind. Asterisk, tough choices for the greater good. Asterisk. He muttered under his breath, "We'll see whose good you're really serving." The headlights flared to life, slicing through the darkness as he drove off toward the faint glow of Town Hall. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Rain streaked down the windshield as Daniel pulled up to the county records building, an old brick structure with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed in the entryway like a tired warning. He had barely slept since the HOA meeting. Every word Marjorie had said echoed in his head, sharp and polished, hiding the rot beneath. He wasn't just fighting for his house anymore. He was fighting against something larger, something corrupt. Inside the building, the air was thick with the smell of dust and paper. The clerk at the counter, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an endless stack of files beside her, gave him a tired smile when he approached. "Back again, Mr. Reyes?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I need to pull all zoning change requests for Willow Creek since 2020, and any building permits filed by the HOA or a company called Kent Development Group." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly at the name but said nothing. She typed for a while, her nails clicking against the keyboard. After a moment, the printer coughed out a handful of papers. She handed them to him with a small nod. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward a security camera overhead. Daniel took the papers and sat at a back table under a buzzing light. The sound of rain against the window mixed with the soft rustle of pages as he began cross-referencing addresses, dates, and signatures. His pulse quickened as patterns emerged, identical signatures appearing on multiple applications, all authorizing community improvement initiatives. The problem? They weren't signed by the people listed. He recognized one of the supposed signers, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Patel, who'd told him last month she never agreed to any redevelopment nonsense. His stomach turned. Forgery. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos of everything, every page, every signature, every timestamp. Then something else caught his eye, a line item dated 2 months ago, labeled asterisk, parcel acquisition, 14, Willow Creek Road. Asterisk his property. The document listed the buyer as Kent Development Group, pending demolition approval from the HOA. A chill ran down his spine. Marjorie wasn't just orchestrating this as HOA President. She was financially tied to the company waiting to buy his land once his house was gone. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the lights flickered. Daniel gathered the documents into his folder and hurried out into the rain. The camera would follow him through puddles and neon reflections, his expression grim, the papers clutched to his chest like evidence from a crime scene. Back home, the farmhouse glowed dimly under a single kitchen light. He spread the papers across the table, pinning them under coffee mugs and toolboxes to keep them from curling. It looked like a detective's board, arrows drawn in pen, connections made in haste. He stared at the names, asterisk Marjorie Kent, Kent Development Group, Willow Creek HOA, asterisk a perfect triangle of corruption. The sound of rain drumming against the roof became the rhythm of his resolve. He turned on his old laptop, the fan whirring loudly, and began searching through county court databases. Every search deepened the story. There were whispers of financial misconduct, shell companies tied to the HOA's reserve fund, maintenance fees wired to unregistered contractors, fake invoices stamped and signed. All of it led back to Marjorie. She'd been running the HOA like her personal empire, using it to funnel projects to her company and sell the community piece by piece. As the clock crept past midnight, Daniel leaned back, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders but his mind electric. He scrolled through his phone and hesitated for a moment before finding a number he hadn't called in years. Lena Torres, a local reporter who used to cover city corruption before the paper cut funding for investigative journalism. She answered on the third ring, her voice husky from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Daniel Reyes," she said, half amused, half suspicious. "Haven't heard that name since the town fair scandal. What are you digging into this time?" "Something big," he replied. "The HOA's forging documents. They're tied to a development company owned by the president. They're trying to steal my family's land, Lena. And I've got the proof." There was silence on the line for a beat, then a quiet whistle. "You serious?" "Dead serious," he said. "I need someone who can get eyes on this before they bury it. Meet me at the diner tomorrow morning. Bring everything." Daniel hung up and stared at the glowing computer screen. The farmhouse creaked softly in the storm. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to hope, fragile but burning bright. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the air crisp and bright. Daniel slid into a booth at Jenny's Diner, a local spot that hadn't changed in decades. The smell of frying bacon and coffee filled the air. Across from him sat Lena, mid-30s, sharp eyes, notepad already open. She listened quietly as Daniel laid out the documents one by one. When he finished, she sat back, tapping her pen against the table. "If this is real, and I think it is, we're not talking about a zoning violation. We're talking fraud, abuse of power, and misuse of public funds. You could blow this entire HOA wide open." Daniel nodded. "They've got a city council hearing coming up to approve the demolition. If this goes public before then it becomes political," Lena said, finishing his thought. "And they'll have to act fast to cover themselves." "Good. I'll make sure we're faster." She gathered her notes and slid her recorder back into her bag. "Send me the digital copies tonight. I'll have a draft ready for the council hearing. If we time it right, we can force them to respond live." Daniel stared out the window as she left, watching her car disappear down the street. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, painting the wet asphalt in streaks of gold. The farmhouse, his family's history, still stood, for now. He knew what came next: confrontation, exposure, and the kind of public reckoning Marjorie Kent had spent her life avoiding. The camera would linger on Daniel as he looked out toward the horizon, calm, focused, and resolute. The rain had washed away the doubt. Now, all that remained was truth. The storm had passed, but the war was about to begin, live, and in front of everyone. The city council chamber buzzed with anticipation long before the hearing began. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, their metal legs scraping against the linoleum floor as residents squeezed in shoulder to shoulder. Local reporters positioned cameras along the back wall, their red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. At the center, beneath the seal of Willow Creek, sat the 5 council members, stern, composed, and quietly uneasy about the crowd's energy. The tension was electric, thick enough to taste. Daniel stood near the front, his folder of evidence clutched tightly in his hands, the edge of the manila digging into his palm. Today wasn't about survival. It was about exposure. At the opposite table, Marjorie Kent sat stiffly beside her attorney, a younger man with slicked-back hair and a permanent sneer. Her navy suit was immaculate, but her confidence had cracks now, small but visible. She flipped through her notes with jerky, precise motions, avoiding Daniel's eyes. The audience murmured when the clerk called the meeting to order. Cameras whirred to life. The live broadcast indicator on the side wall blinked red, now streaming. Council Chair Robert Ellison, a man whose calm voice usually soothed any dispute, cleared his throat. The Willow Creek City Council is now in session. We'll begin with the case regarding the demolition request for 14 Willow Creek Road, the Reyes property. He paused, scanning the crowd. We'll hear from the Homeowners Association first. Marjorie rose, smoothing her blazer, and walked to the podium with the poise of someone rehearsing confidence. Her voice, once syrupy and commanding, now carried an undertone of strain. Good evening, council members. As president of the Willow Creek HOA, I stand by our decision to issue a demolition order for the property in question. The structure is outdated, unsafe, and perfectly sound, Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting through the air. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The chair tapped his gavel lightly. Mr. Reyes, you'll have your turn to speak. Marjorie forced a polite smile, though her jaw tightened. As I was saying, she continued, our goal is community safety. We've acted within our rights and followed due process in filing the appropriate paperwork. Daniel's grip tightened on the folder. Asterisk lies. Every word. Asterisk. When her presentation ended, Daniel rose slowly. The room hushed. Even the cameras seemed to lean in. He walked to the podium, setting his folder down with deliberate care. My name is Daniel Reyes, he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of generations. That farmhouse isn't just wood and nails. It's my family's history, my parents' sweat, my grandparents' legacy. But this isn't about sentiment. It's about corruption. The crowd stirred, whispers swelling. Daniel opened his folder and held up the first document, a county record stamped with the official seal. This is the zoning request Marjorie Kent submitted to the council last spring. Notice the signatures. They're identical to the ones on the HOA's maintenance approvals. He flipped to the next page. And here's one of those HOA forms. Same handwriting. Same date. Same ink. Different names. A low gasp rippled through the chamber. These aren't signatures, Daniel said. They're copies, forged. I confirmed it with the county clerk and with residents listed here, including Mrs. Patel, who never signed a thing. He turned toward the board members. Marjorie didn't just push this demolition through illegally. She's been funneling funds from the HOA reserve into a company she conveniently owns, Kent Development Group. The attorney beside Marjorie jumped up. Objection. He's making unfounded accusations. Sit down, Councilman Ellison snapped, his calm veneer cracking. Mr. Reyes, do you have evidence of this claim? Daniel nodded. All of it. He handed over a flash drive and a stack of printed financial records. Every fake invoice, every wire transfer. They used the HOA's maintenance fees to fund land grabs. Mine's just one of them. Reporters leaned forward, camera flashes strobing across the room. Marjorie's composure finally shattered. This is outrageous, she barked, her voice echoing. You can't prove any of. Actually, Daniel said quietly, I can. He pressed play on a recording from his phone. The speakers crackled with static before Marjorie's unmistakable voice filled the room. Asterisk, once the old house is down, we can transfer the parcel under the development account. The HOA won't even notice. Asterisk. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the clatter of chairs. The council members exchanged stunned looks as the recording continued. Marjorie froze, her eyes wide, her face draining of color. For the first time, she had no words. Chair Ellison raised his hand for silence. Order. His voice boomed through the chaos. "Order, everyone!" He turned toward Marjorie, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Kent, this recording, if verified, constitutes evidence of fraud, misuse of funds, and violation of municipal law." He faced Daniel. "Mr. Reyes, this hearing is being broadcast live. Do you wish to file a formal complaint to initiate investigation?" Daniel exhaled slowly, the months of tension melting into a single moment of clarity. "Yes, sir," he said. "I do." Ellison nodded grimly. "Then effective immediately, the demolition order for 14 Willow Creek Road is rescinded pending investigation. The council will also open an inquiry into the HOA's financial operations." He looked toward the camera. "For transparency, this investigation will be public." The chamber exploded with applause and gasps. Residents stood, clapping, shouting Daniel's name. The reporters swarmed forward, microphones flashing. Marjorie slumped in her chair, her lawyer whispering frantically while she stared blankly ahead, the empire she'd built crumbling under the glare of live television. Daniel stepped back from the podium, shoulders heavy but head high. As he turned to face the crowd, Harold, the elderly neighbor from the meeting, reached out from the front row and clasped his arm. "You did it, son," he said, tears shining in his eyes. "You saved more than just your house today." The camera would linger on Daniel's face, not triumphant, but deeply human, the quiet relief of a man who refused to bow. The noise of the crowd faded under a swelling orchestral score as he looked toward the city seal above the council dais. Justice, at last, had a witness. Outside, as he stepped into the crisp afternoon air, reporters shouted questions, but Daniel barely heard them. The golden sunlight cut through the clouds, glinting off the council's glass doors. Behind him, the council hearing continued to echo on every screen across town. For the first time in months, the fight was over, and the truth had won, live for everyone to see. The weeks after the council hearing were a blur of motion, reporters knocking on the door, legal papers flooding in, neighbors stopping by with baked pies and cautious smiles. For the first time in months, Daniel's farmhouse stood in silence, undisturbed. No construction tape, no orange notices, no threats tucked under the door. Just the wind, whispering through the pecan trees like an old friend returning after a long exile. The late autumn sun cast long amber shadows across the weathered porch, and Daniel found himself sitting on the same step where his father once tied his work boots every morning. The boards creaked beneath him, alive, defiant, still standing. Inside, the walls bore the ghosts of a family's history, framed photographs of harvest seasons, a cracked clock that had stopped the night Daniel's parents passed, and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish. He moved slowly from room to room, touching the walls as if grounding himself to the past he had almost lost. In the corner of the dining room sat a box filled with legal documents, council reports, copies of the fake signatures, and a note from Chair Ellison thanking him for preserving the integrity of Willow Creek. He smiled faintly, but it was a quiet, bittersweet smile. Justice had been served, yes, but it had cost him months of sleepless nights, public scrutiny, and the constant fear of losing everything that made him who he was. Outside, the townspeople began to turn the scandal into a rallying point. The story of the Reyes farmhouse became a symbol of resistance, proof that ordinary residents could stand up to the machine of greed and bureaucracy. Local news ran follow-ups on the HOA investigation, revealing not only Marjorie Kent's embezzlement scheme but a network of illegal property transfers stretching across neighboring counties. Within weeks, she and her attorney were arrested, their mugshots plastered across the evening broadcasts. The same live cameras that had once intimidated Daniel now documented the downfall of the woman who tried to erase his family's legacy. One crisp morning, Daniel stood by his mailbox, holding a letter embossed with the city's seal. He opened it carefully, scanning the words twice before the meaning fully landed. The council had declared the Reyes farmhouse a heritage site, protected from demolition or development without his consent. His hands trembled as he lowered the letter. It wasn't just a legal win, it was validation. His family's story would be preserved, their names written into the official record of Willow Creek. He looked back toward the old house, its chipped white paint, the sagging roofline, the vines that curled around the porch rails, and for the first time, it didn't look fragile. It looked eternal. That evening, the neighbors gathered in his yard. They brought folding chairs, old guitars, and a string of yellow lights that they draped from tree to tree. Children ran barefoot through the grass while the adults shared food and laughter. The farmhouse glowed softly in the background, its windows flickering with candlelight. Harold raised a cup of cider and clinked it against Daniel's. "You gave us all a voice," he said. "You made them remember this place belongs to the people who live here, not the ones who want to own it." Daniel looked around at the crowd, the same people who once whispered in fear of the HOA's power, now laughing freely under the stars. The tension that had once hung over Willow Creek had lifted, replaced with something lighter, something alive. As the music played and the night deepened, Daniel slipped away for a moment to the edge of the porch. The old pecan tree rustled in the wind, and he thought of his father's hands planting it decades ago, the roots stretching deep beneath the soil. Roots, he thought. Asterisk, that's what they tried to tear out. But roots don't die easily. Asterisk. From where he stood, he could still see the faint flicker of the TV through the window, a replay of the council hearing that had changed everything. His voice echoed faintly from the screen, steady and calm as he exposed the truth. He didn't like watching himself, but tonight, it didn't feel like vanity. It felt like closure. He thought about how close he came to giving up, the moments he'd almost signed the sale papers just to make the noise stop. But he hadn't. Something deeper than pride had kept him anchored, something his parents had planted in him long before he understood what it meant to fight for what's right. As the final strains of music faded into the night, Daniel turned off the porch light and stood in the dark, staring at the house silhouetted against the horizon. The moonlight brushed against the roofline, silvering the edges like a crown. It wasn't perfect, the gutters still sagged, the windows still rattled in the wind, but it was his. Every imperfection told a story, every scar on the wood was proof of endurance. A breeze carried the faint scent of pecans and damp earth, and Daniel closed his eyes. He could almost hear his mother's laugh echo from the kitchen, his father humming as he fixed a fence. The sounds weren't real, but they were enough. The past hadn't been erased, it had been reclaimed. When he opened his eyes again, dawn was just beginning to rise over Willow Creek. The first rays of gold spilled over the fields, catching on the edges of the farmhouse and igniting it in soft light. The birds began to sing, and the world felt new again. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun touch his face. The battle was over, but its victory would live on long after he was gone. Somewhere in town, a child would grow up hearing the story of the man who stopped the demolition, the man who stood up for his family's land and made an entire community remember what home really meant. He smiled faintly and whispered to the house, "We're still here." And as the light rose higher, the farmhouse, weathered, proud, and unbroken, stood tall against the horizon, a testament to resilience, truth, and the roots that no amount of corruption could ever tear out.